Hey everybody, Quantum here, and I guess this will come out for members first, if not stay a member exclusive video, but I want to talk a little bit about some interesting developments in the metagame and the Ruby Amethyst evolution. I built this deck a few days ago, and what's funny is, what is today, April 18th, probably when I'm posting this, or 19th, um, I actually saw people at top tables, 1500 rated, doing things with Ruby Amethyst that use Jim Hawkins, and I was like, dude, no way. I played 5 matches with this deck. I went 3-2. Um, and again, my losses were probably like me not playing correctly because trying to get used to like a new deck, a new concept. Just gonna get blown out by certain things, but it's a really interesting concept. And when you get the setup going, it is very strong because people really don't expect it. When you take a look at like, and I'll give you some background as to why I made this deck. When you look at something like Dinkafam's Ruby Sapphire, right, and we can probably see it on like trending or something or popular videos, but yeah, first place. This was his list, post ban list, no Hero, 23 characters. What's so strong about this list? He has a lot of scry cards that, it's easy to see the cards you want to see. He has ramp, so you can get to cards faster, right? Putting down an early Maui Shark, very effective. Having a lot of ink to have multiple interactions, such as play a Be Prepared, follow up with the McDuck Manor, very, very strong. But it's essentially McDuck Manor Turbo. I mean, I don't want to call it McDuck Manor Turbo, Shark Turbo, McDuck Manor Turbo, whatever you want to call it. It's essentially both, right? You put the Maui Shark down, and then you put this location down. Now your opponent's like, okay, I have to turn stuff sideways to deal with that location, but then that opens me up to Shark, and there's a lot of powerful actions that this deck plays. I don't want to give that Shark value. It's pretty strong, right? And again, the reason that it can be so strong is because not only do you have the Shark and McDuck Manor interaction, but you have the McDuck Manor being protected by things like board wipes, such as Be Prepared and Big Sisu. And the reason, for those of you that don't know, at least I'm pretty sure, I don't want to speak for Dinka Fam here, but like this is a great anti-discard option, right? When the discard decks hit the ground and would traditionally, in my opinion, have a really good matchup against this kind of deck, especially if they get their engine rolling early. This card can come in and clear out the discard, right? Then discard, what do they do against a McDuck Manor? They traditionally struggle to get high strength characters on board. So you just run away with the game, even if you have no cards. As long as you have a few things on the board that's hard for them to deal with, and you can wipe their board every once in a while. So the deck is still fairly resilient. Obviously, he proved that winning out in the field. Matchups and different things matter. But what if I said, let's take that same concept and replace the ramp and the scry ability with the control factor and card draw of Amethyst? Because you could play very powerful locations like the Queen's Castle and RLS Legacy, even though this is uninkable. But these are more than just two lore locations. Yes, McDuck Manor has more willpower, which does matter, right? It usually takes two things to take out a McDuck Manor. Only one thing can technically take out a Queen's Castle nowadays. But this card also has an extremely powerful effect, where if you have a character here at the start of your turn, you draw a card. And if you're doing the same things that Ruby Sapphire can do on the Ruby side in removing your opponent's threat, making this card hard to deal with, this card is just sitting there gaining passive lore. And if you do get the extra bonus of moving characters there and having them survive, you get extra card draw out of it. And you have the same interaction as the Ruby Sapphire deck in the fact that you put a Shark on board with that location. Now your opponent's like, do I turn my stuff sideways to deal with this Queen's Castle? It opens me up to Maui Shark. Yes, you don't play as many actions, but the actions you do play are very, very strong. Unlike the Ruby Sapphire version, you could play something that taps down the opponent's characters, like Lose the Way, which enables you to continually use Shark to out a board. You could play things like Finders Keepers, which allows you to draw 3. A very powerful interaction like Dragonfire. I think this card is really underrated right now too. Just deal with that big threat on the board very early, because a lot of opponents think like, let me be very aggressive because it's, before turn 7, where I can maybe lock up the game with a Pete. But if you Dragonfire a critical card in the opponent's line of play, that can throw off their curve. And then the seal factor, which I'm a really big fan of it in the deck, is the Pirate's Life, because this is just insurance. When your aggro opponents, get too far ahead of you, you always know you should have a contingency plan. And with the Shark up as well, and the ability to force the Shark interaction, you get even more value off of something like a Pirate's Life. Plus, it can help you, just like in the Ruby Sapphire deck that Dinka Fam uses, clawback advantage and win the game. So it's very interesting that you can utilize a package like this. And because you have so much card draw and so many ways to maintain advantage, you can play something like Jim Hawkins, because the odds that you see your locations, I mean, you probably go with 4 Queen's Castle and 2 RLS and maybe even libraries, but again, you want to still have some counterplay into the meta. You don't just want to go full gas. The odds that you play the Jim Hawkins and get the free tempo game with Queen's Castle is pretty likely. So not only do you get a character down here that instantly goes to the Queen's Castle or RLS, but you also gain a tremendous amount of lore, right? With the 2 questing Jim Hawkins if it survives, and the 2 lore gain location as well. And it's hard to deal with both, right? We've seen that locations and characters in combination are hard to deal with right now. But what's even more of a subtle thing is the RLS legacy. I think has been really overlooked this set, because if you watch my last couple of videos, particularly around Ruby Amethyst, talking about, go into the filter and, for Ruby Amethyst, filter for anything that has evasive and just see if there's anything you want to use with Peter Pan Shadow. Well, guess what? You can move anything here, even the Jim Hawkins, and if you have the Peter Pan Shadow on board, your character has evasive, which means they also gain rush. So if you play Jim Hawkins and you play RLS Legacy with it, and Jim Hawkins moves here for free, if you have a Peter Pan Shadow on board from a turn or 2 ago, your Jim Hawkins will have evasive and rush, which means he can come in as a 4/4 body, instantly take out an opponent's threat with rush, and not only do you get a Jim Hawkins on board that will quest next turn, and an RLS Legacy on board, which will gain you 2 lore as well, but you've just outed an opponent's threat. So you get even more synergy with the Peter Pan Shadow Finder, which is crazy to say. I mean, I would love to play more Jim Hawkins and more locations, but I do think you still need to be a little tailored. Like, you probably don't need Pegasus if Diablo ends up shifting out of the format, because I think we essentially just over-teched for Diablo, and it's really killed it in the format. Like, and for those of you that says, "Oh, like what happened? I thought it was going to be a Diablo meta." Oh, it is. Don't be mistaken. Diablo and Emerald Amethyst and Emerald Steel and stuff are still very much in the metagame, but again, if you watch and pay attention to those big tournaments and you look at those deck lists like this one here, there's a lot of anti-Diablo hate. Peter Pan Shadow, Moana, Pegasus, Maui Shark, Dragonfire, Brawl, etc. Right? There's a lot of anti-Diablo hate. Like, there's no other reason really to play Pegasus other than dealing with Diablo. But that being said, there is a case to be made that you could make this deck a number of different ways. The Diablo is nice because it procs off Crab and Moana for strength boosts. So you don't just have Crab interactions, but Moana comes in, and if it has the rush, it can challenge right away, give +3 to a Diablo out of nowhere, and then your Diablo is suddenly online, right? You could make the case to run the 2-drop Cusco for the same reason, since you don't only just have Crabs now, you have Moanas as well. So on 3, whether you go Crab or Peter Pan for the Cusco or the Diablo, you can still proc a pretty big strength gain and trade out for card advantage. And again, you could argue that you could play the library instead of the Queen's Castle. The version that I saw online at the high rated was playing the library instead. My version was playing Queen's Castle. I do think the library is probably stronger still, even though it's 1 lore, but I just wanted to try this concept out because these were the 2 lore gain locations. And so again, it's the same kind of game plan. You have these powerful locations up, you make it hard to interact with them by constantly removing the opponent's board, and you have some stuff like a Pirate's Life and Maui Shark to help lock down the board and put your opponent in a really awkward position, forcing them to have answers to multiple things that are hard to interact with, right? An evasive shark in a readied state, hard to interact with. Even when it's turned sideways, locations, hard to interact with, right? So that's the deck. We've got 4 Chernobog and 4 Diablo. No Magic Broom, since again, we're not using the library as much. Being able to still have a card where you can choose when to banish it and draw is good. And then having the Diablo be basically trade up fodder because of the Merlin Crab and the Moana is very nice. You could argue that, you just play Broom instead. Broom is still very, very good, being a 1/2. You can still proc the strength boosts, but you just don't get the draw. Honestly, the Broom is probably better, but I like the Diablo, just getting that card draw guarantee when I trade up with it, versus the Broom, you don't get the extra value out of it if you do have to trade up, but the Broom has the versatility of you can banish it when you want. 2 Snakes, again, for the ability of being able to bounce my own cards. It's a good utilization option, and it's just another 2-drop. You are starved for 2-drops in this deck, and if you're not playing the 12 1-drop package, you are significantly at risk of missing your 2-drop, so you do have to consider that. On 3, we have Fox, Crab, and Peter Pan Shadow. So this is a pretty spicy 3-drop, not spicy, sorry, pretty standard 3-drop list at this point. And then the 3 Moana as the only 4-drop. No genies, no goats, no Merlin rabbits, because we're depending on the location more or less as the card draw replacement, because your other 4 drops are these locations. But You usually don't want to play these locations unless you have to. In the case of RLS Legacy, you would much rather save it for the free interaction with Jim Hawkins. Speaking of 5 on 5, we've got Elsa, Jim Hawkins, and 3 Maui. So again, a lot of board control options and one aggressive option. Obviously, when you're on the draw and your opponent has board presence and you're trying to deal with it, slow them down, the Jim Hawkins situation isn't great, so you probably just end up inking him because you need board control. Luckily, you have 3 Mauis and 4 Elsas in this deck to do that, so really good cards when you're on the draw. And then, of course, Maui Half Shark. Now, not nearly as strong as the Ruby Sapphire version for several reasons. One, you're ramping to the shark much faster in Ruby Sapphire, which actually does make a difference. Getting a shark out on 4 or 5, actually I think it's only really on 5, is pretty nice. And you have significantly more actions in the Sapphire deck that are actually pretty meaningful compared to Ruby Amethyst. That being said, though, you don't need that many interactions. You just need to see 1 or 2 of your really good actions, which you have a lot of, right? Like if all I need is one friends or one brawl to keep recycling, right? I remember one of the matches that I ended up losing, I actually recycled Finders Keepers, and I think that might have been the reason that I lost on game. I think I got 2-0'd actually, which is embarrassing, but I brought back Finders Keepers and I was like, oh yeah, like he's not gonna like threaten me. I'm just gonna draw cards, and then I played the Finders Keepers right off the shark. And then I just proceeded to lose the game after that. He was on Sapphire Steel aggro, and I don't know what was wrong with me. Like I forgot Pete was a card apparently, and he locked up the board with Pete when I had to be prepared. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna clear your board with be prepared, and I was like, oh yeah, Pete. That's kind of embarrassing, but keep that in mind. Pete is a really good check to the action decks, and it's a good check to this deck too. So yeah, just keep that in mind. But yeah, it's an interesting concept. I would take a look at it. Again, on 2, you can mix this up however you want. The actions, the lose the way as a one of, in isolation, obviously it's a terrible card, but the fact that you can play this for 2 and then play another evasive with the Peter Pan Shadow on board and instantly have rush is really nice because you can tap down a threat. And this with any of your evasives with the Peter Pan Shadow acts as like a pseudo Dragonfire, right? Because you're just outing the threat right away by exerting it. And it's more efficient sometimes than Dragonfire, if that makes sense. You still develop a character. It only costs 2 to use this action, and it's a nice action to have in the discard to recur with Maui Shark. The 3 brawls, the 1 Finders Keepers, and the 1 Dragonfire. I really like Finders Keepers, but because I'm at 62, I would probably opt to cut it. Just because, like I said, like I don't know, if you're gonna depend on locations for card draw and friends, that should be enough. Because I remember in the matches, like a lot of times, or not a lot, but anytime I would have like Finders Keepers, I would always have friends in my discard, and I'm like, is draw 2 really that much worse than draw 3? I mean, yes, it is, but like this only costs 3, and it's a song, so I can even just bring it back and hold it and sing it next turn, or just not quest with one of my characters and sing it. Versus this, where I have to hard cast it. It feels really good when you have control of the board and you're like, I'm running out of gas. Let me play the Finders Keepers now. Draw 3 more cards. Now I have 4 or 5 cards in hand. That's really, really nice. Versus Friends, which basically just goes +1. Finders Keepers goes +2, but it's more expensive and it's not a song. And your deck is pretty nicely tailored towards 3-cost characters. I mean, being able to sing Friends with Peter Pan Shadow is very, very nice. Done it multiple times. And then the 2 Pirate's Life, I already explained this. I think this card is really important in this kind of deck, for the simple fact that you need the ability to claw back lore, and potentially the ability to push for game. If you're, I didn't really encounter any matchups where I was struggling to really maintain cards, because your cards also trade very well, but in an instance where you're constantly trading back and forth with your opponent in terms of your characters, if you're able to stick a location, which again you could play for free off of a tempo game with the Jim Hawkins, and the negative card advantage shouldn't matter because you're playing Amethyst, the Pirate's Life can help push you over the edge and just win you the game, right? With the locations backing you up. It's really, really nice. For Be Prepared, for the same reason as they're playing in Dinka Fam's deck, get a location on board, try to protect it, and one of the best ways to do that is playing Be Prepared. And then for the locations, like I said, the ratios could be adjusted here, probably for Queen's Castle. If RLS was inkable, you definitely play more, but because of its uninkability, I'm going to stick with 2. You don't really care if you see this card, but it's nice to see it because it's also 8 willpower. Yes, it costs very much to move to it, but if you have the Jim Hawkins there, it costs only one to move a character here, or any character here, you pay one less, but usually it's the Jim Hawkins. I don't think you play any other location support cards like Tuk Tuk and whatnot. I thought about it, couldn't really find a way to fit it into the list. But yeah, that is my take on a location base or Ruby Sapphire or geez, Ruby Amethyst take on making or adapting Dicafam's Shark Manor list that is Ruby Sapphire into the Amethyst pairing with Ruby. Let me know what you think in the comment section below if you made it this far. Thank you again for watching, guys. Quantum is out.